Let's talk about what just happened because the headlines this morning tell a story that's both predictable and profoundly revealing. Trump's auto tariffs beast KFI, Canada steer KSBCK overnight. And it's almost as if we're watching the same economic movie play over and over again, a movie where short term political theater replaces long term economic thinking, and where working people end up paying the price for elite gamesmanship. Let's start with the hook here: tariffs. They always sound tough. We're bringing jobs back. We're protecting American industries. But rarely do we ask the most important question: who actually benefits? Because what we see now as Canada retaliates with its own counter tariffs is not some clever economic maneuver gone wrong. It's the predictable consequence of a system that prioritizes corporate gain over economic cooperation. Canada's overnight retaliation didn't come as a surprise. It came as a statement when Washington decided to impose sweeping tariffs on imported autos and components. It triggered an immediate and calculated counterpunch from Ottawa. Within hours, Canada's trade officials unveiled a matching set of tariffs on U.S. goods, everything from aluminum and car parts to farm exports, sending a clear message: if the United States wants a trade war, it will have to fight one on equal ground. This wasn't a reaction born of impulse. It was strategic, coordinated, and rooted in the cold arithmetic of global economics. And if anyone believed that America's northern neighbor would simply absorb the blow, they gravely misunderstood how interconnected and interdependent modern trade has become. The hook here is simple yet profound. In the 21st century, retaliation is not just a diplomatic move, it's an economic necessity. Canada couldn't afford to appear weak in the face of U.S. protectionism, because weakness in today's global marketplace invites economic isolation. By striking back swiftly, Ottawa aimed to protect not only its industries but also its credibility. The speed of their response was not a show of anger, it was a demonstration of strength. Every nation that trades with the United States was watching, and Canada's reaction sent a message that will echo far beyond the auto industry. Power politics have no monopoly on trade anymore. Now, let's be very clear about what these tariffs represent. They're not about patriotism, they're about leverage. Trump's administration had hoped to coerce Canada into accepting more favorable trade terms by weaponizing tariffs, a tactic that might have worked in the 1950s when the U.S. economy dominated the world. But today, the U.S. doesn't stand alone atop the global economic pyramid. Its industries are deeply entangled with those of its neighbors. Canadian auto factories depend on U.S. parts, yes, but American plants in Michigan and Ohio depend just as heavily on Canadian steel, electronics, and components. It's a tightly woven web, and when you pull one thread in anger, the entire fabric starts to unravel. The overnight Canadian response exposed the fragility of that fabric. Within hours of the tariffs announcement, markets reacted, automotive stocks fell, investors pulled back, and analysts began warning of disruptions across the entire North American supply chain. Canadian officials framed their move as a measured response. But make no mistake, it was also a calculated warning to Washington. You cannot bully your trading partners without paying a price. This was not just about economics, it was about respect, sovereignty, and the balance of power in a new global order where the United States no longer dictates the terms unilaterally. And here lies the deeper irony. Trump's tariffs were meant to make America stronger, but the immediate effect has been to make it more vulnerable. Tariffs may sound like a tool of protection, but they function more like a tax, one that ricochets back onto the domestic economy. As Canada strikes back, the cost of American-made cars is set to rise, the competitiveness of U.S. automakers will decline, and the pressure on already strained working class communities will grow. The supposed America First policy becomes, in practice, and America pays more reality. It's a boomerang effect, one that those of us who study economics have seen many times before. What's happening here is not just a trade skirmish, it's a revelation of how capitalism operates under stress. When one major economy tries to assert dominance through tariffs, the others adapt, retaliate, and reconfigure. Canada's quick action shows that global trade relationships are no longer hierarchical, they're reciprocal. The smaller nations, once content to absorb economic shocks quietly, now possess the institutional and financial capacity to respond instantly. This marks a shift in global dynamics. Power is diffusing, and economic sovereignty is no longer the privilege of the biggest player. For everyday people, these tariff battles may sound distant, policy talk confined to government halls and business networks, but the consequences are real and tangible. Prices rise at dealerships, suppliers face uncertainty, and industries delay hiring or cut shifts because cross-border demand fluctuates. The political spectacle of standing up for America translates into quiet hardship for ordinary workers on both sides of the border. Meanwhile, multinational corporations, the very entities these policies were supposedly targeting, simply adjust their production strategies, reroute their supply lines, and protect their profit margins. The overnight Canadian response is therefore not just a headline, it's a case study in the self-defeating nature of modern trade wars. The global economy runs on cooperation, not coercion. When one partner chooses confrontation, the other must respond, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Ottawa didn't want this fight, but it couldn't afford not to fight. The retaliation was the language of survival in an economic system that punishes passivity. The world watched, took notes, and perhaps learned something that Washington hasn't yet fully realized. In a globalized economy, no nation wins alone, and every strike invites a strike back. The promise was simple: impose tariffs, protect American jobs, revive the industrial heartland. But as the dust begins to settle, it becomes painfully clear that this promise has once again turned into an illusion. The very workers these tariffs were meant to safeguard are now standing on uncertain ground. Factories that depend on imported components for car manufacturing are seeing their costs climb sharply, and the ripple effect is spreading through every corner of the industry. The story that was sold as economic nationalism is revealing itself to be something far less heroic: an economic trap that tightens on the very people it claimed to free. And here's the hook: every time political leaders declare a war in the name of protecting workers, workers end up becoming the casualties of that very war. In the short term, tariffs might sound appealing. They create an illusion of strength, of a government standing up against foreign exploitation. But economics doesn't bend to slogans, it responds to structure. The U.S. auto industry is no longer a single national organism, it's a complex, cross-border network of suppliers, factories, and transport systems. Every car built in Detroit or Tennessee relies on hundreds of parts sourced from Canada, Mexico, and beyond. When tariffs hit those imports, it's not foreign companies that immediately bleed. It's the domestic plants, the local assembly lines, the small subcontractors that suddenly find themselves squeezed between higher input costs and stagnant consumer demand. The pain starts quietly. A delay in shipments here, an increase in component costs there. Then it escalates. Production slows, suppliers cut hours, and companies begin laying off staff to preserve profit margins. For the American worker on the factory floor, it doesn't matter whether the damage comes from a foreign competitor or a domestic policy blunder. The result is the same: uncertainty, lost income, and economic anxiety. Tariffs, in theory, are supposed to protect jobs, but in practice, they often protect profit margins by transferring the burden downward. And when the costs rise, corporations rarely absorb them. They pass them straight to consumers in the form of higher prices. The irony is glaring. A tariff meant to punish foreign producers ends up functioning like a regressive tax on domestic consumers. Prices for vehicles, both imported and American made, begin to climb, not because demand has risen, but because the cost of building them has. When a $25,000 car suddenly costs $27,000, who suffers most? Not the wealthy buyer or the corporation padding its profit report. It's the average family trying to finance a reliable vehicle, or the worker whose paycheck doesn't stretch as far as it did last year. Inflation creeps in through the back door, and no amount of patriotic rhetoric can mask its sting. And what about the auto workers themselves? They're told that tariffs will bring jobs back home, but jobs don't return simply because tariffs exist. Production follows efficiency, not borders. When costs rise in one country, companies relocate production to another. That's not a political betrayal, it's the logic of capitalism. It seeks the cheapest path to profit. So when tariffs make manufacturing in the U.S. more expensive, corporations don't bring jobs back. They quietly look for the next cheapest place to operate, and often that means automation, machines that don't demand wages, health insurance, or political representation. So in the name of protecting workers, we accelerate their replacement. Economists have seen this movie before. In the steel and aluminum tariff wars of previous decades, the same pattern emerged. A few factories cheered, markets reacted briefly, and then the layoffs began. History has a cruel sense of irony when those who don't study it insist on repeating it. The politicians who promote these policies do so with emotional appeal. They invoke nostalgia for an America that no longer exists, one where domestic factories hummed and workers thrived. But nostalgia isn't strategy. The world has moved on, and the structure of production has evolved beyond national borders. Trying to bring back a 1950s economy in a 2020s world is like trying to win a chess game using checkers rules. And here's the deeper truth: few will say on air tariffs are political theater designed to look like economic justice. They create the appearance of action, of standing up for the forgotten worker, while quietly serving the interests of those who already control the economy. The CEOs, the shareholders, the capital owners, they can absorb the shocks, redirect supply chains, and wait out the market fluctuations. But the worker on the ground cannot relocate their life to escape rising costs. They face the storm directly. Every policy choice that fails to address this imbalance is just another layer of illusion covering up a system that rewards power and punishes labor. So, while the headlines may focus on the clash between nations, the real story unfolds in the everyday realities of working people. In the Midwest, factory shifts are being cut back. In border states, small manufacturers are scrambling to renegotiate contracts. In showrooms, salespeople are explaining to customers why prices are rising faster than wages. The trade war is not being fought in diplomatic halls, it's being fought in paychecks, in grocery bills, in monthly budgets. The pain is quiet, but it's everywhere. That's the hook the public must see through. Behind every promise of protectionism lies a paradox, an economy so globalized that every wall built to defend it only traps us deeper inside our own contradictions. History has a way of whispering warnings before it screams, and what we are witnessing today with Trump's auto tariffs and Canada's retaliation feels eerily familiar to those who have studied the past. The 1930s stand as a painful reminder of what happens when economic nationalism masquerades as strength. Back then, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was passed under the same banner of protecting American jobs, with the same fiery rhetoric about standing up to unfair trade. It began with promises of revival and ended in global recession. The hook here is simple but sobering. Every generation that ignores the lessons of economic history ends up reliving them, only this time with greater stakes and fewer excuses. When the United States implemented the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in 1930, it was meant to shield domestic industries from foreign competition in the midst of economic turmoil. The intention was national prosperity. The result was international collapse. Over 20,000 imported goods were taxed. Foreign nations retaliated. Global trade plummeted by nearly 2/3, and unemployment in the United States soared from 8% to over 25%. The world's economies, once linked by fragile threads of commerce, snapped under the weight of protectionism. Fast forward to today, and the rhetoric sounds hauntingly similar. Tariffs are being sold as tools of sovereignty, but they operate as triggers of fragmentation. History doesn't repeat itself word for word, but it rhymes with devastating precision. The difference today is scale. In the 1930s, the world economy was smaller, less integrated. Today, it is a web so complex that even minor disruptions can send tremors across continents. A tariff imposed on a car part in Michigan can idle an assembly line in Ontario, which then affects steel orders in Hamilton, logistics companies in Chicago, and chip manufacturers in Taiwan. One political decision ripples through 1,000 invisible connections, turning what looks like a local act of defiance into a global act of destabilization. That's the irony of modern capitalism. The more interconnected it becomes, the more fragile it is to nationalist policies. Every attempt to build walls around an economy ends up shaking the foundations of global interdependence that it secretly relies on. What makes this even more dangerous is the political blindness that accompanies it. Leaders often invoke the past without understanding it. When they say, "We must stand up for our workers like we did before," they forget that before led to collapse. Tariffs may buy a headline, but they sell out the future. They satisfy the emotion of the moment, anger, frustration, resentment, but they ignore the economics of tomorrow. The global economy does not reward isolation, it punishes it. When you raise barriers in a connected world, you don't protect yourself. You isolate yourself from opportunity, innovation, and growth. And history proves that isolation is not protectionism. It's economic suffocation dressed up as patriotism. The hook that policymakers keep missing is this: capitalism has evolved, but our political thinking hasn't. We still talk as though countries compete the way they did a century ago, when industries were national and production was contained within borders. But in the 21st century, supply chains are borderless. The notion of a purely American car or Canadian steel is a myth. Every major product is a mosaic of global labor and materials. So when tariffs strike, They don't target a foreign adversary, they target an entire ecosystem that includes domestic industries and workers. It's a self inflicted wound disguised as a patriotic punch. What's remarkable and tragic is how these patterns repeat not because of ignorance, but because of political convenience. It's easier to blame foreign competitors than to confront domestic inequality. It's easier to point the finger at another country than to question why workers at home haven't seen real wage growth in decades. Tariffs become a symbolic solution to a structural problem. They offer an illusion of control in an economic system that has long escaped national boundaries. Just like in the 1930s, fear is being weaponized for political gain, and once again, ordinary citizens will bear the economic cost. When Smoot-Hawley triggered a collapse in world trade, it didn't just hurt exporters and importers, it eroded trust. Nations that once traded cooperatively began seeing each other as threats. The result was not only economic depression, but political instability, the kind that sowed the seeds for global conflict. That's why today's trade wars feel so much larger than simple tariff disputes. They are signs of a deeper unraveling and unwillingness to accept the realities of interdependence in a world that cannot function without it. Every tariff, every retaliatory measure is another step backward into a history we once swore we'd never repeat. And yet here we are, watching leaders celebrate policies that carry the same genetic code as those that deepened the Great Depression. The pattern is so clear, it's almost mathematical. Economic protectionism breeds retaliation, retaliation breeds contraction, contraction breeds instability, and through it all, the wealthy find ways to profit while the working class pays the bill. History has shown us this cycle before. The only difference now is that the stakes are higher, the economies are larger, the networks more fragile, and the global consequences potentially irreversible. The past is not behind us, it's unfolding again, one tariff at a time. The most revealing truth of this entire tariff crisis is that it exposes the myth at the heart of modern economic nationalism, the illusion that any country, even one as large and powerful as the United States, can put itself first in a global capitalist system that has long since erased national boundaries. When Trump declared that these tariffs would make America great again, he was appealing to a vision of self-sufficiency that no longer exists. The cars rolling off assembly lines in Detroit, the phones in our pockets, the very food on our shelves, they are all the products of global interdependence. The hook, and perhaps the tragedy, is that capitalism itself no longer has a nationality. It flows wherever profit leads it, unbothered by flags, borders, or the slogans painted on podiums. In theory, tariffs are supposed to protect domestic industries by discouraging foreign imports, but in practice, they act like a tax on globalization itself, a tax that doesn't weaken competitors, but destabilizes the very systems on which domestic industries rely. Modern manufacturing is not confined by geography. It's an intricate dance of logistics, technology, and labor that crosses borders multiple times before a single product is completed. Take a single automobile, for instance. The steel may come from Canada, the sensors from Germany, the wiring harness from Mexico, and the design software from Japan. Each of these components converges in an American plant for final assembly. To impose tariffs on this process is to attack the bloodstream of your own economy. You don't protect it, you poison it. The deeper irony lies in how global capitalism operates. It promises nations independence while binding them together in invisible chains of dependency. Every political leader wants to claim they're bringing jobs home, yet the companies they defend are multinational entities that have no loyalty to any flag. They operate across borders, moving capital to wherever labor is cheapest and regulations are weakest. So when tariffs are introduced, it's not the CEOs who suffer. They simply adjust the spreadsheet, shifting production to a less expensive region. The people who pay are the workers whose jobs and incomes are caught in the crossfire. The illusion of economic nationalism is that it speaks in the name of workers, while its consequences fall squarely upon them. If capitalism had a motto, it would not be America first or Canada first. It would be profit first. That's the real guiding principle behind the system, and it's why policies based on patriotic rhetoric often collapse under the weight of their contradictions. Governments can talk about borders, capital ignores them. Politicians can talk about national security, corporations talk about shareholder security. The disconnection between political language and economic reality is what makes these moments so volatile. The tariffs aren't just a trade measure, they are a collision between two incompatible forces: the nationalist dreams of politics and the borderless logic of capital. The hook that few in mainstream media will dare to acknowledge is that this conflict reveals how little control governments truly have over global capitalism. For decades, political leaders across the spectrum have outsourced their economies to private interests in the name of efficiency and growth. They celebrated free trade, deregulation, and open markets as triumphs of progress. Now, when the predictable consequences emerge, massive interdependence, fragile supply chains, and corporate dominance, they respond not with structural reform, but with symbolic gestures like tariffs. But tariffs can't reverse globalization, they can only expose the dependency it created. It's like trying to stop a storm by shouting at the wind. What makes this moment even more revealing is that the United States, the very architect of the global capitalist order, is now struggling to control the forces it unleashed. The same corporations that benefited from free trade now find themselves adjusting to political chaos caused by protectionism. They don't see countries, they see markets. They don't care who wins a trade war as long as profit margins survive it. And this is where the real danger lies when economic decisions are dictated by private capital rather than public good. National policy becomes theater, a series of gestures designed to appease voters, while the real power brokers operate quietly in the background. As these tariff wars unfold, it becomes increasingly clear that America First is not an economic strategy. It's a political slogan masking a structural weakness. The U.S. economy, like every major economy on earth, depends on the global system it claims to resist. You can't unplug from globalization without unplugging from your own prosperity. The supply chains, investment flows, and labor markets that fuel growth are transnational by design. They were built to serve profit, not patriotism. So when a leader attempts to bend this system to nationalist will, the system bends back with economic retaliation, market instability, and public disillusionment. What's emerging now is not just a trade dispute between two countries, it's a philosophical crisis of capitalism itself. The tension between globalized production and nationalist politics cannot hold indefinitely. Every tariff, every retaliation, every market fluctuation is a symptom of a deeper contradiction, a global economy without global governance, driven by national leaders who pretend to have control. That's the great paradox of our age. The auto tariffs, the retaliation, the chaos, they're not isolated events. They're expressions of a larger truth. Capitalism has outgrown the nation state, but the people living under it have not. And until that contradiction is addressed, every attempt to put America first will end up revealing the same thing, that in a global economy ruled by profit, no nation truly comes first.